All right, everyone, welcome to this morning's session, Captivate Your Audience with Visuals, Part 2 of Delivering Successful Presentations. I'm TJ Biddick, Professional Development Coordinator for Sam Houston State University, and I'd like to welcome you to the Learning Academies at SHSU's presentation. So today's session will focus on the principles of effective slide design. Allow me to introduce your presenters for today. Dr. Danica Schieber and Dr. Ashley Smith teach business communication in Sam's College of Business Administration. They have presented for us before, and we are very excited to have them back again. So, professors, whenever you are ready, you may begin.
Hi, everyone. As TJ said, I am Ashley Smith, and this is Danica Schieber. And let me make sure I get my slides going. There we are on the slide also. We are very excited to be doing this again and learning or adapting things we used to do to new spaces. So thanks for being here. And today we will talk about a few things. We're going to talk about some basic principles for effective slide design. And we will also look at some guidelines for basic types of figures. You may have seen the attached Word document that had some sample charts and things you might use them for. And then we'll also look at 4 functions in PowerPoint that can help you build those kinds of things directly into your slides so you can kind of stay within the system. So we're going to start again with principles of effective visuals, and we're going to talk first about assertion evidence structure for slide design. This assertion evidence structure, which I'm going to refer to as AES, is a structure for developing your PowerPoint slides that is based on research in classrooms and in workplace training scenarios. And basically the guideline here is that the top of your slide, where you normally would put your header, should be a complete assertion sentence. So I kind of think about this as like the thesis statement for the slide. What is the one concise main point that people should take away when you're done talking about that slide? That's the assertion part. The evidence part shows up in the body of the slide, and we really want whatever is in the body of the slide to be a visual support generally. So it's probably unreasonable to think that there would be 0 words in the body of your slide, but I would encourage you to think about how you can maybe turn keywords into images. Sometimes I use them like labels and pair them with a corresponding image. But the idea here is that when you look at a PowerPoint slide while somebody is presenting, you're not listening, right? So if you're thinking about the person in your audience, you want them listening to what you're saying instead of reading everything on your slide. So really want to trim it down and have it reinforce or support what you're saying. Now, part of the research on this structure found that as long as you have the assertion headline, that one sentence takeaway at the top, you will still significantly improve people's retention. So if you have to pick only one part of the assertion evidence structure, pick the assertion headline. But I would encourage you to go for the visuals too. So that's kind of like the overall structure. Danica's going to get into design more for that evidence part, the body of the slide. Are you ready, Danica?
Thanks, Dr. Smith. So in terms of slide design, I know a lot of people say this, but also you would be surprised how many professionals break this rule. Definitely encourage you to keep your slide design as simple as you can, because as Ashley mentioned, you're really the star of your presentation. So we don't want people sitting there staring at your slides and reading through all of these long bullet points to get this information. We want them to hear it from you, and the slide is just backing you up with your evidence. So Anytime you're designing a PowerPoint, we want to make sure it's simple and it's easy to follow. Here, of course, I'm referring to like basic PowerPoint slides as opposed to a slide deck, which we would see more often posted to a website separately. That is going to be very data heavy with lots of information on the slides. So the one we're talking about today is the presentations that you're actually giving. So when we're using basic slide design, we want to keep it really simple. Typically, we call it the 7x7 rule, which means no more than 7 things in one bullet point and no more than 7 bullet points on one slide. This just keeps it simple, and it also keeps the focus on you so people aren't reading and reading and reading. Other ways to break up that information is obviously to use bullets like we have here. You can also use numbered lists. You can compare and contrast using all those different functions that we have in PowerPoint, so it's easy for the audience to follow. I would definitely encourage you to avoid using all caps. As we call in many different situations, it's like yelling when you see that on text, right? Anytime you see all caps, it's for an exclamation. It's to point out something that's really important. But it can be easily misused, especially on slide design. So it can be very confusing for the audience. As you see here, we only have 3 bullet points, and it's just kind of backing up what we're saying. Next, please. Definitely also use contrasting colors on your slides. Here, typically, we like to use a nice white background with a dark font. But you'll notice the examples on the left are really hard to read because they're either light colors on light backgrounds or dark colors with dark backgrounds, both of which are really hard to delineate between the background color and the font. The ones on the right are much easier, as you can see. The other thing that's problematic about these two, the example on the left, is there's a lot of red and green, which may be very difficult for those who are colorblind, which would cause even more problems if they're trying to delineate between those 2 colors. Next, please. And of course, in terms of fonts, you have many different slide designs that are already built into PowerPoint, some of which are fantastic, others of which are absolute garbage. So you want to keep in mind how important it is that fonts really influence the way we respond to documents, and sometimes in ways that we don't even realize. So the main difference between a serif font and a sans serif, I have several examples here. The serif fonts are the ones, the first bullet point. They have these little, I call them feet, little hook things at the bottom and at the top of each letter. Those are called serifs. And the next one is sans serif fonts, the second bullet point. They're really more straight up and down letters. They're very straightforward. Often they're curvier. The main difference between these types of fonts would be print and web. So serif fonts are in almost all books. All of our textbooks are written in serif fonts because the font keeps our eye on that line. So it's actually easier to keep reading because the little feet keep our eyes going steadily on that line. However, when there's white light coming from behind a screen, it's actually much easier to see with a sans serif font, the second examples like Arial and Calibri. So if you look at your phone, it's typically set at a sans serif. That is the default setting because it's easier for your eye to see those different letters. Traditionally, serif fonts were used more often, especially because traditionally they came from print backgrounds. But serif fonts, sans serif fonts actually gained popularity after World War II when we had a huge boom of immigrants coming to the US. And that's why all of our street signs are written in sans serif fonts, because it's easier for people to read from a long distance different letters when they're straight up and down and they don't have any extra pretty curves like Palatino, for example. So those are kind of like the quick, brief history of the serif and sans serif fonts. You want to be aware of who's in your audience and who's going to be reading it and how easy it is to see from, say, the back of the room. I have an example on the next slide, please. So for example, if we're looking at 2 fake movie posters here, what do you just kind of think to yourself, sorry, what do you notice about these 2? The example on the left is a highly serifed font. And then the example on the right is kind of a bubble cute font. The example on the right kind of looks like this would be a fun movie. Like there's probably bears in it and they probably hug. It's really adorable. The example on the left looks very straightforward. It looks very professional and it gives it a totally different feel. So whether we realize it or not, it really impacts the way we respond to documents. Next, please. The other rule I would encourage you to do in terms of decorating your slides is just be careful with decoration. Often people feel like they have to fill up white space with pictures, hearts, arrows, things like that. Just keep it simple. A famous data design consultant, Edward Tufte, said that if it doesn't give information and it's not imperative to show what you're saying, it's called chart junk. And he urges us to always avoid using chart junk. I would say almost everything on this slide is chart junk. We all know what a pencil looks like, so you don't really need a picture of that. Typically, we don't do business outside staring at computers and squinting together. It's really not necessary to include hearts and smiley faces. Keep it really simple or your audience will get distracted and not look at you. They'll just be looking at your crazy colors. So in terms of highlighting any decoration, which I would consider chart junk, and color, keep it really simple. Next, please. So next, I'd like to talk about some conventions of data visualizations, just so we have a brief overview. Some of these will be very, very familiar to you, but you would be surprised how often I see people misusing these. So I'll talk about some basic rules of how we can use different data visualizations within our slides. Next, please. Thank you. So typically, and I realize this one seems obvious, but we want to make sure we clearly label everything and have clear design. Many times we'll see different visual designs that seem to speak for themselves, but they're not clearly labeled. So we want to make sure we always have a descriptive title at the top. Next, please. Label the X and Y axes, no matter what, and any other necessary additional information. Sometimes we'll have bar charts and different pieces of information that have a lot of pieces of information in one chart, in which case we need to kind of pull out different pieces of information that are really important. Let's look at a couple of examples that also show the most relevant data. We have a couple more
guidelines.
Oh, thank you. And I'll get to those examples. We also want to make sure that that data is the most important relevant information. We're not just filling it up with extra stuff. And keep that design simple. We want people in the audience to quickly look at our charts, our graphs, our figures, and get that information they need. We don't want them to sit there and scrutinize all the information that we have. Thank you. So I've got just a couple of examples here. The example on the top left is from an agricultural website. And I believe, because it wasn't labeled, is talking about how to dig a certain kind of culvert and how far to dig it down. It also talks about the hydraulic radius, depth, etc. But because we don't have a title, it's really hard to kind of get a clear understanding of what's happening. You'll also notice that it's kind of hard to go across. Your eye tracking might be a little bit difficult if you're looking at, say, the distance at 11 feet and going across and getting all that data. It's just really hard to track. You'll also notice that the integers aren't exactly equidistant on the left-hand side. So we want to make sure that that data is clear and easy to follow. One way we can make this graph a little bit easier to understand is if we had a clear title and if we shaded every other row, kind of like the example on the bottom. So this one was actually taken from a different website, and it had a lot more information, but what we ended up doing was pulling out the most important information that we wanted our audience to see. You also notice that we shaded every other, so it's easy to skim with the eye, and we pulled out the most important information. So we were comparing males and females, and then we were also looking at the challenges, social interaction, and diversion. So that was the most important information that we wanted to highlight for our audience. It's easier to read. Next, please.
Before we look at the next set of slides, I also wanted to point out in this table, like sometimes when you're looking at these numbers, there's not a clear reference, right? So is 4 low or high? So this title gives an indication of what the scale was on. And you might also think, if you're doing something like tables, you know, what's your in? What are those total numbers out of? So that would be an example of thinking about that. What information needs to be labeled?
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
So these are tables and these are pie charts.
So in terms of pie charts, which are often used terribly, the example on the left is actually taken from the City of Ames website from several years ago, and it's really confusing and very difficult to read. Typically, I urge people, if you are making a pie chart, to keep it to 7 pieces of pie or fewer. This one clearly breaks that rule. And you want to start with the biggest piece at 12 o'clock and go around as if you were following a clock on backwards. Again, this one has many different shapes, sizes. The spaces between them aren't equidistant. And it's really difficult to tell from the key on the right side which color is which. So for example, the different light blues, I have a really hard time focusing on electricity and beverages. They look very, very similar in color, but it's hard to go back and forth from the key to the pie chart and figure out which is which. So that is very difficult. There are many problems with this particular chart. If you quickly do the math, it does not equal 100%, and that is one of the basic rules. It's a percentage of the whole. So if it doesn't equal 100%, it's not an effective pie chart. There are way too many pieces. You'll notice that the percentages, some of them are outside, some of them are inside. So it really doesn't keep a simple design. It is not easy to quickly understand information when we glance at this chart. So another example would be actually our example from Sam here on the right. And this is used in, I believe, in donation materials. Correct, Dr. Smith?
Yeah, so we put this together. It's not actually like from Sam specifically. It's just kind of a mock-up to show something that would be a little bit better. Obviously, there are some things in this chart that still could be improved. We have a little bit of low contrast on the color, but we see here that it really is a snapshot, and we want those figures to kind of visually reinforce the key data, kind of key most important points quickly, instead of having to do that cross comparison that we were talking about.
Exactly.
Did you want to add on here? Sorry.
Oh yeah, just one more. Just the idea for these pie charts is to quickly get that information that you need. And so if you're trying to explain to someone your donation will be split up in this way, it's really quick and easy to see where exactly it will go. The colors are different and it's easy to understand because there's only 3 pieces and it's clearly explained. Next, please. In terms of bar charts, they're a really handy way to explain most types of information, especially what things are being used. You can talk about products being sold over time. And it can be really confusing, especially when we have data stacked upon data. So you'll notice the example on the left is comparing quite a bit of information, but it's also missing a lot of information. For example, we don't know what the different colors mean, or I have no idea actually what that means. And it's very difficult to measure with your eye because it's 3D. I would definitely encourage you to never 3D a bar chart because it actually doesn't help our understanding of the numbers or the amounts. So if you're looking at the example on the left, if you look at Monday, if it didn't tell me that was 282, I would have to add it up because it looks like it's 300. And if I need an accurate number, I'm going to have to actually do the math. So the 3D actually makes it harder to read. It's harder to point out what those numbers are. So they have to put more information into the chart just so we understand what's happening. It's also a little bit misleading. It's hard to tell which day had more and fewer. So Tuesday had 156 of green, but then there was more on Wednesday, but it's really hard to tell because they're stacked on other pieces of data. So it's a very confusing chart. You'll notice that the example on the right, while it's also stacked data, it's easier to read because it's simplified, and we actually have a clear key at the bottom where we have blue sent and green as received text. So we can actually measure the differences between them and get a better idea across the spectrum of ages. Next, please. Okay, and Dr. Smith is going to talk about how we can actually incorporate these into PowerPoint.
Thank you, Dr. Schieber. Okay, so for this next section, we wanted to kind of show you just some of the tools that are available in PowerPoint. I know PowerPoint is not the only program that you can create slides in, but you should see similar tools in other programs. And remember that through our Office 365 subscription, we have access to PowerPoint. We can download it onto our computers for work purposes. So we're going to talk about these 4 functions that are available in PowerPoint, actually building charts, some smart art options, image editing that you can do right in PowerPoint, and then also the Slide Master. Okay, so if we're looking in PowerPoint, in the Insert option, there are many things that you can build in here. And you're probably familiar with the shapes that you can add in. And this is kind of a manual way to create different kinds of models on your slides. But there are other tools that are built right in. So like other Microsoft programs like Excel and Word, PowerPoint also has the option to input many different kinds of charts, including things like we talked about today, the column or bar charts. They also have pie charts. And you can see that for each of these categories, you have different options. Now, there are many fancy things that we can do in PowerPoint. Give it a second while it loads. But you'll see, I know this is busy. I'm sorry, guys. You'll see that the recommendations that Microsoft offers us don't always follow what is actually effective practice. So while it is a useful tool to have in here, we need to make sure that we are being critical about what we're actually adding in. So don't always believe PowerPoint, is my point. The nice thing is you can do this all right in PowerPoint, and then if you decide that you don't like the way that it looks, that's not what I want, you can just pick a different style. You can also change your chart type. So once you have your data in there, it's pretty easy to go ahead and just pick these other functions to figure out, you know, how is it really going to look the best for my audience. So that's handy, and I think a lot of people are probably relatively familiar with the chart tools that are available. I would encourage you to just get in there and play with it and take the liberty to go ahead and change your charts to be different types so that you can see which option really works the best. And you'll notice that in the Word file that we sent out, you'll see some of those samples from the slides with some reasons for why you might use certain kinds of charts. So think about really what your purpose is. If you're trying to do that change over time or looking at trends, it may be more valuable to show a line graph. If you're trying to do change over time, but while your slide is up, you are going to be comparing specific points in that change over time, then you might do something more like a bar or column chart. So you really want to think about when you're picking your chart type, you know, what is the point that I'm trying to make so that you can hone in on that goal. But PowerPoint also has, yes, I want some smart art. PowerPoint also has a variety of smart art options, and you can see that they have different setups. So if we're doing lists, these can be particularly helpful. If you're talking about showing a cycle or a process, how things happen, then they have some options built in here for you. And once you insert one, it's just like the charts where they're going to prompt you with text boxes and give you different options to add in those details and change colors. And these smart art models just have a few more complex relationship options to offer than a chart might give to you. You can also, straight from PowerPoint, add in images. And you can just search right through here. And the nice thing is that PowerPoint is going to give you the option to select Creative Commons only to kind of help you make sure that you're using things in a fair use kind of way. So that's pretty handy. And you can pick your option, insert it. Look how impressive he is. He's got a chart in the background. So once you have your slide in, you can see PowerPoint is going to try to give you some source information here, so we can signal to our audience that, you know, we're trying to be ethical. We might need to dig a little bit more to get some more links in there or some more information, but they've got us started on the path. But let's say that we had the right permissions to also edit this image, right? Maybe it's not quite what we want it to be. So one thing that we can do here is we have a bunch of editing tools right in PowerPoint. We can make it more of a background kind of picture, like a watermark. We have different color options, effects. These aren't always, they might be more play or than you might want for a professional presentation, but depending on the point that you're trying to make, right, or who you're presenting to, you have some options. The option that I like best, built right into PowerPoint though, is this option to remove the background. So sometimes I just want something a little bit more plain, right? Or I just want the front part of the image. So we can choose this remove background option, and then we can give it a little bit more information. So you might notice that some of this man's hair is gone. So we can use the mark areas to keep, and we can just kind of color it in, and his head should come back. And it takes a little bit of kind of touch and go. But if you get some area popping back up, you just go in and say, no, I didn't want that. So it's kind of a little bit back and forth, but it gives you some more options of things to add into your slides to maybe make it a little bit more dynamic. You know, maybe you want Sammy Bearcat in your slide deck, but you don't want the whole football stadium.
Ashley, we do have one question. Tamara asks, where did you get the picture option from again for the web pics with permission?
Right. So that is just here in the pictures option. So you can insert a picture from your device. So you can kind of like browse into your files and their stock images, but there's also an online pictures option, and that will pull up that search function. If you want something a little bit more simple, Microsoft also has a pretty robust icons list. And you can search here, but you can also, there are themes.
And if you don't like the stock images that PowerPoint has, you can also go to creativecommons.com, which has free use photos that you can use as well, and you don't have to worry about copyright issues.
Flickr also has a function to search for, you know, if you can use an image for educational purposes or public domain. So they have some more things there. Again, when you're dropping an image on, it is important to think about whether or not that image is really a visual support for the points that you're making, right? Sometimes people get more focused on having something funny or fun than something that really is a visual reinforcement of the argument that they're making or the point that they're making. Some other good guidelines for images is to give them some kind of frame. So in the case like this, we can kind of frame this man and make him by putting him on where his waist is on the bottom of the frame. And then when we project it, it looks like he's kind of like there standing in front of our slide, presenting for us because of where he's arranged on the slide. So that's one option. If you are not using your image in that way, then it really is advisable to go ahead and put a picture border on your image. And this is just going to help your slides look, you know, clean, sharp, really, you know, it'll help you with alignment also, creating nice lines on your slide design. Okay. So we've talked about building in charts, we've talked about adding in those smart art models, and we've talked about image editing. The last thing that I wanted to show you in terms of slide design tools is the Slide Master. And the Slide Master is where you can go to create the theme or design for your slide deck. So confusingly to me, PowerPoint puts this in the View tab. So the Slide Master is in the View tab. And if you go here, you'll see that there is this Slide Master button. When you open the Slide Master, this is where you build what the template slides are going to look like in your design. So I can tell the Slide Master here what font, for example, to use on every slide. And every slide that is this title and body format is going to have this font in this size, right? Every time I tell it to make a new one of those. The bullet is always going to look like this. And again, it's going to use this font and this size and all the way down. So you can even also edit what the colors and background of the slide is. So you'll see that I just selected this blue box, and that is just a rectangle shape that's filled in blue that I put onto this slide. And you can, for example, go to the SHSU brand guide, for example, and tell it specifically which RBG color or the hex number, so that you can make sure that your colors are really on point to match whatever it is you are sharing, right? Or if you want the logo for your department on the bottom of every slide, you can do that. I pulled this logo from the brand guide. So all of those things can be edited in. You can decide which types of slides you want in your slide deck design. All these things. So this is handy, and the other reason that it's handy is that if you decide that you want to, for example, change your font after you have your deck all the way built, you can just go into the Slide Master and change it. And if you haven't manually changed any of your other slides, it should update to be what you made the change to be. So that's a handy tool that can really build your kind of professional branding when you're doing your presentation. And again, give that impression that you have a really cohesive visual representation of yourself that's going to support your point and your professional identity. So those are those tools. We wanted to mention a couple other resources. You have, Donica, can you get that link for me?
Sorry?
I sent you. Can you get that link, or I can get it? There is another link we wanted to give y'all. So you have the Word file, but we have another link we want to give you for a professor who used to teach in the business school at the University of Dallas, and he has a whole page on PowerPoint slide design videos that includes how to do that image editing, some more good tips for visuals. So we'll put that in chat in just a minute. All right. Overall, we hope that today you've gotten some tips for how to put your slide together. I really encourage you to use the assertion evidence structure, but I will warn you, it takes practice and it takes time to work on editing your assertion headlines down so that they're concise, thinking about what they really should be, finding the right visual support. But the research suggests that it's worth it. It really helps people retain your information because it forces people to listen to what you're saying and gives them a visual reinforcement at the same time that they're getting your oral delivery.
So actually, we do have a question. Mm-hmm. Is there an SHSU branded PowerPoint slide template that we can use?
That would be a great question for Marcom. I know that the brand guide is really easy to find online. I don't think that it includes a slide design.
There used to be one on the Marcom website, but I'm not sure if it's still there or if it's being updated at the moment. But as Ashley noted, with the colors and the font schemes, it's really easy to create a branded version like ours. There's several floating around the College of Business that I know we all like to use. So definitely check out the Marcom website.
Yeah, and this one that I'm using is the one that I made for my job interview, and I've just been using it since I started.
And I do know that the Marcom also has in the unrestricted drive, they have the word marks and logos as well. So if you're trying to pull down the SH box or the TSYS box with SH on it, that's a good place to find it as well.
Mm-hmm. As well as little paw prints and Sammy Bearcat images.
Yeah. And the nice thing about the brand guide too is it'll tell you like where and when and how you can use certain logos. So it has a lot of good information in there.
And we have another question. Someone asks if they can get the PowerPoint. I will show you at the end of this presentation how to get the presenter's PowerPoint. It's actually attached to your course in talent management. We don't currently have another session planned, but we can always consider that. And the T drive that I mentioned, that is the T drive, the unrestricted folder. It's in the T drive unrestricted folder. And then Ashley has just posted the brand guide as well.
Okay. Do we have other questions?
I don't have any yet. If you want to add anything else, or I can go ahead and, I do have somebody who says, thank you for your presentation. It was very helpful. But I can do a little bit of the wrap up, but we can leave the chat box open for anybody else who thinks of another question. And the one thing I do want to remind everybody about, first of all, I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Smith and Dr. Schieber. Very, very useful information. I even learned something today that I did not know before. So this is a very good opportunity for us to be able to bring new folks in who have to work with these kind of communications and teach this kind of communication on a daily level. And we do have one more question. It's a question that says, I do have a question regarding fair use. I was under the impression that images could still be used by indicating that the images are used for educational purposes. Is this correct?
Donica, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So that, it depends on what you mean by educational purposes. It's actually covered under the Fair Use Act that was from the, I believe 95. And if you're using this presentation in the classroom to like share a student presentation, to share with other students, or let's see, I think the other rule is in a private department meeting, then yes, you can use most images from the internet as long as you cite it correctly and say where you got it from. However, if it is a public presentation or anything that is out-facing, something that you would post on the website, anything that would go to an outside audience that isn't, say, like within this group or something, or within your department, then you need to make sure you're following copyright rules and you're not using other people's images.
And a lot of search engines have an option when you're searching in the images to filter for different levels of Creative Commons or different levels of use. Like Donica said, generally if you give a citation, a source credit on something, I mean, you're doing a good amount of diligence there, but there are a lot of options out there for images that are available to be used specifically for educational purposes. And I linked the creativecommons.org website where they tell you a little bit more about what the different licenses are and how you can use them. And they have some links to sites that have content that are under those licenses, including also music. So it's a lot of open source out there these days.
There are a lot of great options. So if you want to make sure you're safe, check those out, and then you don't have to worry about accidentally misusing somebody else's photo.
I also put in the chat the link to Robert Yale's page on PowerPoint presentations. The nice thing about his video on assertion evidence structure, you can also find that video on YouTube. It's about 20 minutes long. The first 10 minutes is a summary of many of the key studies showing the effectiveness of that structure. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that, that's available in that video.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. If you professors would not mind if I end sharing your screen, because I would like to show everybody how to get access to the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and end sharing. Let's see. So to find the slides from your transcript, you want to go into Talent Management, and from the welcome screen, you're going to look for this Learning. Click on that and click on View Your Transcript. And if you are viewing this on Talent Management through the video course, you will probably see this on your Active tab. But if you're viewing it after the fact, after you attended the live course, you're going to click on the down arrow and click on Completed. So either one, Active or Completed. Look for the title of the training, and over to the side you're going to see a button that will either say View Certificate, or it actually might say View Training Details. The training details is the one you want. Click on that. And you'll get to the details of the class, and right next to resources you'll find the slides for the presentation and an additional tool for your use. We hope you enjoyed this session of presentation techniques, and we will hopefully see you again.